So this is the cemetery in the yard of Trinity Church. Trinity Church is the oldest church congregation in New York City. It was established by the King of England when New York was a colony of England. In the early 18th century, the Queen of England gave Trinity Church a very large land grant that included all of the land from just above here up to Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. So that's a huge plot of land. And that plot of land the church used for various purposes, including giving some over for the establishment of King's College, which became Columbia University. Also, they earned a lot of rent out of renting out the land or leasing the land on long-term leases. And that made the church quite wealthy, although the church also was wealthy as a result of its elite congregation, which helped to support the church. Incidentally, when the Queen gave the church the land grant, Trinity also got the right to all the beached whales that washed up on shore on Manhattan Island. So if you ever see a beached whale in Manhattan, call Trinity Church because it's theirs. But it also gives you a sense of how different commerce is in New York now and even in the 18th century than it was in the 17th century when Trinity Church was originally established. Another sign of Trinity Church's wealth is the size of this cemetery. This is the end of Wall Street. This is some of the most expensive land in the world, and Trinity Church has been able to keep it over to these very old graves. But one of the things I want to talk about right here also is this monument here, which is a monument to it's called the Soldiers and Martyrs Monument, and it was built in 1852 to commemorate the prisoners of war who died in New York when New York was occupied by the British during the American Revolution. So when the British came in and took over, they imprisoned the soldiers that they took in, that they captured. They imprisoned them in various places around the city. The old jail, which actually was called the New Jail, which was on the Commons. They also used the sugar houses, like the Rhinelander Sugar House is very famous for being used for soldiers, for prisoners of war. Very famously, they had prison ships around Brooklyn Navy Yard, and they held prisoners on those ships, and the conditions were truly, truly awful. Many, many, many more people died as prisoners of war than died in actual combat in the American Revolution. About 70% of those who died in the Revolution, about over 18,000 people, died not on the battlefield, but in the prisons. And so you might ask why it took until the 1850s, which was many years after the Revolution ended, to erect this monument here. And the story goes that Trinity Church was trying to maintain its cemetery here when the city at the time started to cut streets through this area, because everything behind me was undeveloped during the 18th century, from the 17th century into the 18th century. But once the Hudson River in the 19th century becomes the major commercial thoroughfare for boats, replacing the East River waterfront, then they start to cut the roads through and develop the west side of Lower Manhattan. And when that happened, they cut roads all the way through Broadway. Before that point, everything kind of ended here at Broadway, which is just here where we're standing. And so in order to prevent that from happening, Trinity Church put up this monument so that the city, what city government in its right mind would sacrifice the monument to Revolutionary soldiers in order to cut a road through. And so that's why Trinity maintained its cemetery intact, and that's why this monument was put up here in the 1850s. But also recollecting the importance of the Revolution, of course, and of the memory of the American Revolution in New York in the 1850s. Just a couple more things about Trinity Church. This is actually the third church on this site. This church was built in the 1840s. The first church was built in the 17th century, but it was burned during the fire that the British set, well, actually, that we think the British set when they came in and occupied New York in 1776. Still not entirely settled how that fire occurred. But occur it did, and it actually destroyed many of the original buildings in the city, including Trinity Church. The parishioners of Trinity Church paid to erect a new church after the American Revolution, and that church stood here for several decades, and then it was actually compromised by snow, heavy snow on the roof, and the roof caved in, and so they replaced it with this church in 1846. And this church has stood here since then at the end of Wall Street, a real monument to the elite of New York, certainly in the 17th and 18th centuries, and really beyond.